Welcome everybody to another Future Trends Forum. I'm Brian Alexander. I'm your chief cat herder, MC, and host for today. Um, if you are new to the Shindig Forum, let me just quickly explain what you're looking at. The screen in front of you is the environment where we will spend the next hour. At the very top, you can see two windows. Those are called the stage, and they are for individual speakers or content items. Right now, you're looking at me, a hairy man in his library, and off to one side, you can see the slide deck. And in a few minutes, we'll kick the slide deck off and put Anya Kamenetz on. The bottom part of the screen, you should see a swarm of icons. Mostly they have faces, some of them looking kind of interesting, but I'm talking about them. Each of those represents a person or a person with a connection. And those are the participants for today's conversation. So you can mouse over them to make them bigger. You can click on them if you want to get close to them. And in fact, in a little while, we'll be able to just click on them and you can each talk to each other through video and audio. And you'll see as we go that that swarm will move and oscillate back and forth as people come, go, move, and think. Now on the bottom side, your very bottom right, you'll see a couple of big orange buttons. One of them says raise and has a hand. The other one has a little ask on it. The raise is if you would like to ask a question, which is great. So you click that, we notice it, and when we pause, we'll bring you up on stage. We'll probably kick me off stage. You get to come on and we can see you and hear you and have a conversation. If you don't want to do that, if your video isn't working or if you're just shy, that's fine. Click ask, and you'll be able to type in a question, and then we'll read that out loud to continue the conversation. Meanwhile, if you're keen on text, I really recommend this. Make sure to use the chat box, which already has a bunch of people talking about their weather, most of them suffering horribly, it seems like. If you can't find the chat box, just take your cursor, mouse over your own icon, your own avatar, and you'll see a little I am chat box. Click that, and you'll be up. In the meantime, if you're on Twitter, we're already getting some conversation on Twitter. Please tweet using the hashtag FTTE. I'll put that in the chat box right now. Actually, I'll type it correctly. How about that? Now, also on the right edge, you'll see a few different icons. One of them on top is for the Future Trends report, which I'll explain in a second. Below that is a scary guy with an axe. That's me, and you can see a link to the work I do. And below that is a link to the purchase page for the test by Anya Kamenetz, and we'll explain that in just a second. So, to get things going, let me just show you a couple of quick slides. So first, if you guys could advance at Shindig headquarters, you could advance to the next slide, please. So the Future Trends Forum is a project of the Future Trends in Technology and Education project. This is a monthly report I've been doing for several years. It's available online, but it usually appears monthly through email. It's a trends analysis that takes a look at current trends, each of which backed up by research. So half of the document is really footnotes, all of them clickable, so you can find out more. This takes a look at an environmental scan of emerging trends in technology and education in the context around technology, ranging from economics to demographics. Like I said, it's been going on for a few years, so we can test some of these trends over time and see which ones are the strongest and which ones are weaker. It helps give us a better picture of the future. If you want to find out more, just go to ftte.us. You will download some past reports and learn more. And of course, you can subscribe. Next slide, please. I just want to mention a couple of supporters for this event. One of them is NiserNet from New York State. They have been generously supporting the Future Trends report. I want to thank them for that. Next slide, please. And also supporting us is Shindig. Shindig is a video conference provider. We're providing this very technology that we're using now. We're also providing humans who are helping us with a very, very supportive way. I want to thank Shindig for making this possible. Shindig.com for more info. Next slide, please. Today's guest on the Future Trends Forum is my friend Anya Kamenetz, who is speaking to us from Brooklyn, near where I was born, actually. You may know her for a few things. One is as an author. She has 3 books out: The Test, which we'll be talking about, DIYU, a very famous and influential book, and Generation Debt, an early and important entry into the new phenomenon of rising student debt. She's also the author of an email newsletter, which I strongly recommend. She has a website which tells you a lot more about her. And on the side, in her spare time, when she's not raising a wonderful child, she's also an education blogger for NPR, National Public Radio. So Anya and I are going to be talking for the next 35 minutes. And as we go, please think about questions, comments, observations that you have. And when we're done, we're going to turn this back over to you and have some more time for conversation. And if things work out right, we'll pause halfway through and let you guys mingle. So if Shindig folks, if you could take the slides down and pull up Anya on stage, please.
Hi, Brian.
Anya, good to see you.
Always.
How was everything in Brooklyn?
Just fine. Getting along, hoping for a
Oh,
real
very good.
spring.
It'll come, and then it'll get humid. So welcome. I'm very glad that you're here. I thank you very much for your time. And I just want to, as a visual aid, make sure that everyone can see that we have copies of your book available. So I have one right here on my phone. So I've been showing this off to people and getting people to read it. So if you haven't
Nice.
seen it, this is Anya's most recent book, The Test. And that's what we're going to lead off talking about right now. So just to get things rolling, Anya, you've been studying testing in education for some time, and you published now the definitive book, I think, on the subject. Can you tell us, looking ahead to the future, what are the two or three biggest lessons you learned from the past of testing in education?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think, you know, assessment is always going to be essential to the education process, both in the intimate settings of classrooms where teachers want to give students feedback. Students also seek feedback from each other. And in fact, I think through education, we learn to give and receive our own feedback and be self-critical. I think that's part of learning. The conversation that's going on now is connected to some big picture issues around the use of data and data-driven decision making. So this is a trend, a mega trend that, as you and others have pointed out, is permeating not only education but almost every area of modern life. And along with it comes very important questions about autonomy, about privacy, about who is collecting data for what purpose, asking what questions, what analysis are they applying toward that data, and who gets to say what the outcome is. And so the dramas we've been going through around high stakes testing and accountability in American schools in the last 15 years, I really see as being a prelude to a much larger conversation. This idea about, are we going to use tests as a means to control and punish students in schools? Or are there going to be a means to offer opportunities to people and expand people's opportunities via better living through the algorithm? So I think that's one major drama that's happening in testing. Another huge question is, as you move forward into this future of increasing emphasis on technical and data-driven areas and skills, what is it that we're not capturing? So how are our techniques in the quantitative sense, how are they limited? And for the qualities that we're trying to emphasize, the human qualities, the social emotional qualities, how to create truly compelling portraits of those for the purpose of what learning's always been, which is to further the goals that we have as human beings and toward the good life.
Well, that's awesome. My God, I mean, those are two huge subjects. Let me just grab onto the first one you mentioned. Um, where do you think some of these larger conversations will go? I mean, when you describe using test as a method of avoidant punishment, that suggests the kind of almost Skinnerian model that our mutual friend Audrey Waters has spoken about before, kind of behaviorist model of training. Then on the other hand, there's the way of leading to better living through algorithms, which sounds a world apart. Is that the kind of debate that you think that will unfold across education and beyond?
Well, absolutely. And, it's not metaphorical. I conducted an interview last week with an organization that reached out to me and said, we're small but growing. We provide Chromebook blocks to schools that want measure control over the usage of school-owned devices even when students take them home.
Ah,
And so this is surveillance software that parents are signing up for. And they're tracking their students' browsing history and the search terms that they type in on their search engine, even when they're at home on their own time. And the organization, the startup, reached out to me because they said, "Isn't this wonderful? This school has prevented 3 suicides because they've intervened, because they've been flagged when young students are searching terms related to self-harm." And, you know, that is a good news story because this intervention happened and it was a good thing, but it raises so many other enormous questions about what is, where are students' privacy? What level of control should administrators be expected to have? Are they put in the position of being, mandatory reporters for a word that a student types into a
Uh,
device in their home hours? So, we really are at this precipice of saying, because we can know everything, or potentially we think we know everything about students, does that mean we should know everything? And what are we empowered slash obligated to then do with that information?
I wonder if that means that student IT staff, uh, academic IT staff, will become mandatory reporters as well.
Well,
They're
that's
monitoring that
exactly. I
kind
mean,
of
the
level
person
of
I spoke
detail.
to was exactly that person, the IT person, and they had to relay that information to the principal and to the counseling staff in order to make that happen.
Just a technical note, Anya, can you get a little closer to your mic? Um,
Sure.
or can you? Oh, that's wonderful.
Okay.
Just a couple of folks have said that they needed things to be a little louder. Um,
I'll
thanks. People
try.
can hear
Does that
you,
sound
just
better?
they don't. It's better for me. What do you guys think? Sounds good from one, good from others. Excellent, excellent. Well, that was maybe a little too close, but that was better. Um, thank you, Karine, for the question. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I want to make sure that people can hear you okay. Um,
Sure.
I find that when I record podcasts, I often end up trying to like avoid masticating the microphone, just to be too close. Um, so this is an enormous transformation describing. It sounds really civilizational, not just in terms of education. Should we, for example, uh, I'm thinking to say that at the urban level, to what extent do we have a municipal responsibility to monitor the mental health of citizens based on their social media posts? I mean, we're already seeing a fringe example of this in the anti-terrorism world, where there's the sense that we have to monitor people on social media to look for terror plots. Maybe this will expand. Uh, I mean, some in the futures world talk about the grim idea that privacy was a 20th century concept and we left it behind as we left the 20th century. I mean, if we're at that kind of level, then education changes as a result.
Well, I'm not, I guess I'm optimistic by nature, but I would also point out that it's no accident that we're having these debates in the realm of education specifically, because education is a, a a social institution wherein people are empowered to tell their own stories. Self-authoring is a major function of education. And so, you can look at that as, on the one hand, school keeps something on you, which is called a permanent record. On the other hand, you earn a credential and you amass a portfolio of work, and you're empowered and enabled at the end of a good education to to tell the world your story. You know your strengths. You know what are the most salient experiences in your life. And so I believe that through education, we can kind of start to build a positive vision of what it means to have control over the data that we amass in the course of our everyday lives, or to at least to advocate for that control, or for that control to be shared between us and the institutions to which we give up our power, or at least share power.
Well, that's a fascinating way of looking at this. It seems like perhaps the domain of one's own, or the at least the e-portfolio, would be a way of balancing this out. When we have a kind of two-wing approach where the school keeps something on you with a permanent record, and then I've been hearing some interesting discussion of late about making transcripts available via blockchain, and I wonder if that
Mm-hmm.
would cut between the two of them. But that Yeah, that goes a little bit off topic. In your opening remarks, you mentioned I think one of the deepest questions of our time, which is what is it that we're not capturing through data? So if you have your Fitbit on, if you have the SAT, what are we missing in this torrent of quantitative information? Well, where do you see us responding? Where do you see educators seeking to complement the quantitative with qualitative? As you said, the social, emotional, and human aspects.
Well, I think the attempts that are in place are fumbling. There was a recent story in the New York Times about the implementation of surveys to try to assess social and emotional competencies in California schools. And these surveys are going to be linked to accountability. It's not punitive accountability, but there's consequences that are going to come. And folks like Angela Duckworth have been very vocal in saying, just because I use this tool experimentally and it has predictive power experimentally, as soon as that measurement becomes a target, it's no longer going to be a good measurement. And we don't necessarily have good in situ contextual measurements of something as complex and subtle as a student's state of mind vis-a-vis her own brain power or her own ability to learn. And so, in the absence of that, we're going to have to fall back desperately on something called human judgment and our confidence in a professional community of teachers, of students. And, I really believe in it's no accident that we're having this conversation right now. When AlphaGo is generating these incredible demonstrations of artificial intelligence when it comes to problem solving and analytical behavior at a level that seems intuitive, the debate rages ever more and the stakes get higher every day over what is it that humans do really well. And one thing that humans do really well is they have human relationships with each other. And if we can't figure out how to place a value on that, that's not quantitative because it's manifestly not quantitative. I don't think we're going to be able to promote it that well. So I think that acknowledging that it's really important is a very good first step. Rushing to quantify it may be a mistake.
Oh, that's a great caution. That's a great caution. If you all haven't had a chance to follow AlphaGo, this is Google's artificial intelligence that just triumphed in the incredibly complex game of Go. There's a Wired column on this that I strongly recommend, and we will hopefully have a forum or two on automation and education. Um, so that's an interesting dynamic that we seem to be falling behind on qualitative measures. When I say we, I'm speaking generally in education. Do you find any other nation that does a better job than the United States in this?
Well, you certainly can think of examples of countries that are valuing these types of areas in child development and the happiness of children, which is one very kind of blunt way of putting it. I don't know that anyone's ahead of us in terms of measuring it because it might be in the United States we have a unique mania for measuring and quantifying in order to put a dollar figure on the value of these types of things rather than simply asserting that they're important because of values that we hold, non-monetary values, but ethical, moral values.
Well, on that, if I could spring a last minute question on you. Dun, dun, this is a really dramatic moment. We just have the Senate just confirmed John King as the new Secretary of Education. Um, do you think this signals a change in our testing strategy nationwide?
I think that the comments that King made prior to his confirmation were very instructive in terms of setting a message. The reauthorization of the ESSA kept the basic framework of our testing policy in place in terms of the number of annual tests, but it also included a lot of back end language that granted flexibility on the stakes. And to have John King come out and say, we feel that there's unnecessary testing, there's redundant testing, and it's taking the joy out of school, I believe is his quote, really signals that he has heard, and I think as a veteran of the battles over testing in New York State, which had a higher level of opt out than any other state in the nation this past spring, and many people have not forgotten those battles. There was a movement to try to stop with confirmation that came from the opt out movement. So, you might see it as a political move, you might see it as a move of conviction, but the fact is that there are very few defenders of the status quo when it comes to the amount and types of tests that students take in schools today.
I don't know if you can hear this. This is me frantically taking notes. Um, I think what you said is this is almost a period to a sentence in history where we've gone for almost 20 years from the race to the top, that we've expanded testing, especially K-12, uh, at high stakes. We've expanded in terms of quantity and quality of testing, and that we seem to have ended that. We've turned a corner and we're going to move away. Um, do you think that we will see the amount of testing decline, or where do you think this is happening?
I'm afraid that it's not that easy because
Mhm.
reforming a testing regime is like reforming the tax code. A lot of people can point to where they see extra things later on, but paring it down becomes very difficult. Um, there's money in this bill in the ESSA to audit testing programs on the state level for redundancy and for whether or not the tests are out of date or low quality. And so it remains to be seen how energetically states will take it up and under what pressure politically to reform, and whether there will be immediately calls to say that this has gone the wrong, too far in the other direction. I have heard anecdotes that when it comes to district level benchmarking tests, which, most of the tests that students take are at a district level and even at a school level, there are some schools that are managing to cut back on those types of tests through the applications of software-based assessments that are a little bit more lightweight, that happen in the classroom, that give instant feedback. And so this is a partial amelioration of that kind of burden that can happen sort of informally.
Fascinating. That would be uh, that would be a sign at the lower level, not the state level, but the district level, almost a Brownian
Right,
motion kind of change. Um,
right.
but let me um, back to this in a minute. But what I'd like to do now is, if I could ask everybody here in the couple of rooms that we've got, if you could take a minute right now, grab somebody else, just click on their icon and chat with them for a
Oh,
minute
cool.
about where you think testing is going right now. So just take your mouse, take your cursor, wave it over people, grab somebody, and then your two icons will connect and you'll be able to talk to each other right away. If you have any audio or visual problems, turn to text because we'll chat to each other. And we'll do this for about a minute or so. Let's just hear your thoughts and then we'll come back together. Sound good? Dive in. I think Shindig folks, if you can kick Anya and I off the stage for a minute, we can dive in and grab some people too. Okay, so if you haven't used the Shindig platform before, that's an example of what they call their mingle function, so that you can grab people and chat with them. So I just terrorized one poor fellow whose mic wasn't working, so it looked like a silent movie. And then I just had a delightful exchange with Preston at the Northern Virginia Community College World about testing in CCs. So what did we discover? Anya, what did you find when you got to grab a mingler?
Well, we were talking a little bit about competency-based education, which I think is something that, people are
Uh,
interested in across higher ed, which relates directly to assessment. And I just was in Florida last weekend, and they've just passed a law relating to competency-based ed in K-12, and they're kind of going whole hog on mastery-based learning rather than seat time in a lot of ways. And I've heard some reactions from folks in the public ed world to say that competency-based education sounds great, but what it is amounting to in practice is a whole bunch of new computer-based tests and boxes that students literally have to check before they go on to the next grade. And so there's a dilemma here in the sense that there's a really great idea and a lot of people want to catch on to it, but to do it really well in a nuanced way takes a lot of hard work to really identify what the competencies are, and crucially to figure out,
mhm.
what is a authentic demonstration of this skill.
And if it needs a lot of hard work, that suggests to me it needs more people, more time, and overall become more expensive, which kind of flies in the face of what CBE is trying to accomplish in a way. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
would this be a case where, oh, go ahead.
I recall a RAND study many years ago. Kentucky public schools tried to implement a system of basically portfolio-based assessment, and uh, teachers and principals said it was too onerous, and that was one of the reasons that it didn't continue.
Well, portfolios do take more time to assemble, more time to manage, more time to assess, and they're really worth it. But yeah.
Well, I guess, I mean, it depends because if you really think of them as part of the teaching and learning process, you could say, well, we're not losing classroom time to test prep or test practice or test administration
Mm,
because it's all
mm,
learning and including up to and including the preparation and defense of the portfolio. That's learning too. And so
mhm.
it's organic in that way. Obviously, you know, for teachers, grading papers and grading portfolios is a huge use of their time outside of the classroom in particular. So I don't want to be, disingenuous about that. But in terms of overall learning time, there may not be that much of a sacrifice implied.
Well, that's a good point. And it's well said. And maybe this is a way to look into if we de-emphasize the quantitative. That's one way of approaching the qualitative in a very positive, constructive way. That it will integrate it into teaching and learning. It will be a wash in terms of resources, and the outcomes may be better.
Right.
When
I mean,
I was just talking with Preston. Oh, go ahead. You please go ahead.
go ahead.
We have a little lag, so it's almost like long distance telemetry. Um, Preston works in the community college world, and he mentioned that they have a very, very different testing regime than either K through 12 has or that the rest of higher education has, and that they have to really carefully assess a wide variety of students from teenagers to seniors with an incredible diversity of backgrounds, then slot them into a curriculum, and that there's a big need for better testing in order to actually find out what students know and then use that to stage an intervention in order to be or interventions in order to be able to help students through the curriculum and on their way to their eventual path. Which sounds like I don't have a question from that. I thought it was just a very, very good point.
Well, I have a response to that actually because I think a lot about
Right.
remedial education as being a major stumbling block for students in community college. Research that's come out showing that for students who score above and below the line on a placement test when they enter community college, their outcomes really diverge in a way that's not accounted for by the noise on the test. You're talking about a 2 or 3 point difference. Um, but for someone to be placed into remedial math,
Mm,
for example, pretty much guarantees that they're going to have a very, very hard
hmm
time getting any kind of degree. And so I would argue that the problems with the placement test system, in particular in community colleges, really deserve to be addressed. And the over reliance on placement tests to make our decisions, which in fairness, community colleges have small amounts of resources to deal with very large and diverse populations, and but they're using types of tests that may not be accurate, and that are in fact quite high stakes for individuals because they determine their pathway through college, the amount of funding that they're able to access during college. And so I think this really requires a lot more critical thought and attention in terms of where do these tests come from and how valid they really are.
In many days, or in many ways, even though we've been doing testing for a while, it seems like we're still getting used to doing this at a basic level. Um, as you said before, we're still fumbling in some ways. Um, Remedial education. There was a piece this morning. I don't know if it was either in the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed, which was arguing that all too often we see um, teachers with fewer resources and smaller backgrounds being assigned to do remedial education, which doesn't help with in terms of generating good outcomes.
Right, right.
Well, let me ask everybody else here. Those of you who were just mingling with each other and chatting, what are some of the other points about testing right now in 2016 that came up in your conversation that you would like to share? If you could, either click on the raise hand button, the big orange one on the bottom. If you want to just type in a few words, either in the ask button or in the chat box, and just say something that came up that you'd like to add to the conversation, or raise your hand and we'll bring you up on stage. Kick me out of the way and bring you up instead. That'll be a big improvement. Um, any questions that came up or any thoughts, especially about where you think testing is going over the next few years? When I first started teaching, I was told that whenever you ask a question, you have to count in your head to give people a chance to actually respond, because time passes much more quickly when you ask a question than when you're trying to answer it. So Joe Cornelli has this really interesting point. Uh, Contributions to open source projects can be peer reviewed. That's more interesting than testing. And Joe, I assume that it's open source projects that can be peer reviewed by anybody on Earth, not just the students in your class, right?
Or perhaps people
And maybe
engaged
we
in
can add to
pursuit.
that open access project. Say again? Hmm.
Well, sometimes it's qualifications for peer review, like participation in a certain community or demonstrated work on similar projects, right?
Ah,
I have a chance. I've done some research on a story. I haven't published it yet on the use of peer assessment in college courses, particularly in MOOCs. And, it's developing quite quickly, I think, because of the ability to gather huge amounts of data and some, calibrated peer review where you establish someone's ability to rate someone's work by matching their grades with the grades of a trained assessor, so that then when someone,
yeah.
let's say you have someone grade 5 papers and you match their grades with the grades that a trained graduate student or someone gives on those papers, and now you know that this person has a
Mhm,
baseline
mhm.
ability to assess. And then you set it up in a system where uh, you if you want your design project or your research paper graded, you must grade 5 other people's research paper, and then you get your research paper returned to you with a peer grade that's calibrated and averaged across a group of people, and also often comes with feedback. And the feedback enhances the learning process, writing the feedback, receiving the feedback, acting on it, both for the students who receive it and the students who engage in the peer feedback. And so, in the comparatively low stakes
Awesome.
non-credit setting of a MOOC, people are very pleased with this because it allows them to have qualitative assignments and open-ended assignments and questions, and allows them to cultivate and create their own abilities to perceive feedback, which is an essential part of becoming a good practitioner at almost everything. So I think we're just kind of at the edge of what that could
It
be like.
really
And
is.
calibration is like the use of data to moderate group collaboration.
You remind me of something I did in grad school. But before I go down memory lane, there are people who had hands up. Shindig, can you put Rachel M on stage and get me out of the way, please?
Oh, hi. Hi,
Hi.
Anya. My question was concerning, I guess, your view on the role that digital badging might play in either in place of testing or as a supplement to it, particularly in higher education and maybe adult education. I just want to get your view on what you see the future of that being.
Um, I haven't seen it working yet. I've been hearing about it for about 6 years, and uh, I I think it's a great idea, but I haven't seen it yet in functioning practice. And so I guess the question is, a badge is, yeah, I'll say what I said before on this topic, which is a badge gains its meaning from its association with a recognized brand, a community, the Boy Scouts, Microsoft. And so it's not decentralized. There's some entity attached to the badge that gives it out. And so I guess the question would be, who is that and in what context. I don't think badges travel alone. I think they have to be part of a larger system, and I just haven't seen it working yet.
I see. Just because it's too difficult to gauge the issuer of the badge.
Well, the issuer, there are no badges without issuers. Issuers are the entire point. And so, again, I mean, I'm totally willing to be wrong on this, and I'd love to see some entity emerge, but I don't see a disassociated entity. I mean, people use LinkedIn as a badging platform because it's a platform. It exists, so it has the the infrastructure. It has the ability for people to write recommendations anywhere where people can go and recommend each other and create trust records is a place for informal credentialing to take place. But it's the platform first, not the fact that there's a thing called a badge. I mean, there's a thing called an internet comment, but some internet comments are really important. If you're on Airbnb, your internet comments can make you lots of money. Other internet comments are best deleted and never looked at again. So it's all about the platform, I think.
That's true. That's true. But maybe universities themselves might issue badges, and in that way, you'd know, as far as, the university would issue an actual letter grade, a badge would have the same value.
They might. They might.
Okay.
Great. That was a great question. I'm so glad you brought up badging and that that's vital as an example of what's going on in testing. And for those of you new to Shindig, this is the kind of thing that we can do, that we can pull people back and forth off the stage. There is someone whose name is, I may get this wrong, MG Craw. I may have this spelled wrong. If you raise your hand, if you still want to come in, let us know. Raise your hand again so we can bring you up. We have a text question from George S. He'd like to know, how does community college remedial differ from public state university remedial? In parentheses, he adds 40 to 60% of new fresh at Cal State take at least one remedial course. And I bet that's George Station. Welcome, George.
How does it differ? Well, I mean, the major difference is that it's more common in community colleges for students to be doing remedial work. And a second major difference is that at many, if not all, community colleges have worse graduation rates than four-year colleges. Cal State system would be an exception, and very large open access institutions do tend to function more like community colleges in this way. And so the issues that I mentioned with placement tests being an incredible stumbling block, that may potentially steer some students awry, certainly apply to four-year institutions.
That's a great point. I mean, I really appreciate, Anya, how you pulled out the unique nature of Cal State. If you guys haven't looked at this, California has this unusual setup where in the public education system, they have, for higher ed, they have three tiers. They have the University of California system, which is the elite, and they have a community college system, which is enormous. And in between, they have the California state system as a kind of bridge continuum across those. And more recently, the CSUs have been doing a lot of outreach in the K-12. That's a terrific example to bring up. Box just lit up with ideas. Ellen Borkowski from not too far from you, Anya, she's in upstate New York. She mentioned that K-12 tests associated with Common Core are now linked with teacher evaluations, and how that takes away from classroom time as teachers try to prepare their students for the exam. Did you want to jump in on that one?
Well, the use of test scores and teacher evaluations is going to remain a point of major controversy. I like to quote the American Statistical Association, which issued a rare public statement on value-added measurement, which is what this is called when you try to estimate a teacher's impact on a teacher's impact based on changes in the student scores. And what they say is that state-level standardized tests are meant to create broad generalizations and groupings of students. they're not meant to capture fine-grained changes in student growth in small heterogeneous groups of students over very limited periods of time. And that's not even getting into the issues of teachers whose subject matter doesn't align perfectly with what's on a Common Core test in math or reading, such as science teachers, social studies teachers, physical education teachers, foreign language teachers, art teachers, and the list goes on. And so there's a really long list of problems involved in trying to correlate student test scores with any measure of teacher performance. And this issue is going to continue to be quite contentious. And frankly, I mean, the way that states are responding to these issues is by diluting the proportion of test scores that go into a teacher evaluation pie. So saying, it's not going to be 50% test scores anymore, it's going to be 40% or 30%. But that doesn't really address the core issue if you don't believe the value-added measurement is a reliable indicator of teacher performance. Just because there's less of it to go around doesn't mean it's better somehow.
Good point. Thank you, Ellen. That's a very, very rich idea, and that's in many ways one of the most powerful uses of testing. I'm going to get your Twitter handle wrong again. I'm sorry. I think it was MG McCraw. That's why I want to call you McCraw. Shindy, can you bring this poor guy on stage in my place so I can apologize to him?
How's it going?
Hey, Michael, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I like the MG McCraw is a new is certainly a new way to say that. I'm doing well. One of the things that Ellen and I actually were talking about, I have two kind of questions. One that Ellen and I talked about, and one that's sort of off in another direction. So the first thing is, can you talk a little bit about the movement to begin assessing learning, or begin sort of taking stock of learning throughout the learning process, as opposed to a test at the very end where everybody sits down and takes the same one? I know there's been sort of advances in technology that can begin, whether through games or other forms, to begin seeing what students are learning as they're performing, as opposed to at the very end. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So, I mean, this is what teachers do, right? They provide feedback on students and evaluation on students as they go through the learning process. So there's nothing inherently new about that. And when you're learning, when you yourself are learning something, figuring out how you're doing as you go along is a core part of that. So the movement is toward, can we somehow extract out of that organic process some residue that tells us about learning as it's happening? And this can happen in a number of ways. There are tools that are tablet-based that teachers kind of carry around in the classroom, and they're taking notes, or they're extracting evidence, they're filming students, they're getting students to film themselves, talking their way through a math problem, or describing how they got an answer, and generating artifacts of learning as they go along, and then various attempts to kind of script out or compare that information across periods of time. Then there's attempts to, if a student is performing activities within a software system, it's trivial to collect everything from the speed of their keystrokes to their eye gaze in some situations, to simply the answers that they give or the choices that they make within an adaptive learning system or a game. So there's lots of different attempts to create probability-based systems that try to gauge student knowledge states from point to point. And I'm speaking in generalities because it's such a wide range. There's Dreambox, there's Khan Academy, there's Curriculum Associates, there's the iReady program, there's any number of learning games that have dashboards and leaderboards and are trying to extract evidence of student learning. Where there's something missing potentially is figuring out how all that sums up and how that correlates to other outcomes that we want to see. So is it equivalent to a letter grade? Is it equivalent to graduation requirements? Is it equivalent to students' long-term success? It's a little bit backwards to say, how does their performance in Dragon Box algebra compare to their performance on a standardized test? Because you don't want to use the standardized test as a measure if you believe the standardized test is imperfect. But the movement from snapshots of learning to thinking of learning as a graph or a line graph or a chart over time, I think is a really good one, because you start focusing not so much on, the up and down, if it's the stock market, right? Is Xerox up or is Xerox down today? Well, that doesn't matter. What matters is the trend. Where's it going, right? And the same thing with the student. It's not how they mastered it today or not. It's how hard are they trying? How quickly are they learning? How slowly are they learning? Are they motivated? Are they engaged? Are they giving it their all? And these are the types of things that teachers can actually influence on a day-to-day basis, which is why it's so good to have that information in hand.
That's great. Thanks. The second part is, second question has to do with a tweet I actually sent you a little while back about Campbell's Law, and you touched on it a little bit, and my dog is interrupting. Come here, Thor. Touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to hear your reaction a little more. So, Campbell's Law, this idea that the more any social criteria is emphasized, it becomes distorted. The actual work that contributes to whatever you're trying to measure in sort of a social or human sense gets distorted, and the potential concerns for how administrators, teachers, policymakers, whomever may look to certain metrics, and by looking at those metrics, it distorts the actual sort of process for getting there. Can you talk a little bit about that? And that'll be it. Thanks.
I go into detail about this in the book. So Goodhart had it as, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And Donald Campbell in the 1970s actually pointed at educational testing and said, this is an example of we're going to distort the educational process in undesirable ways if we make everything about a score. Not the test itself becomes less useful. So something ironic about that is that I guess the corollary of that would be, if you are using unpredictable measures, you can't optimize so much for any particular measure. And so in some ways it's possible, and this is a little bit cockeyed, but that the upheaval we're going through right now and the constant transitions from test to test, yes, it's causing confusion, yes, it's causing upheaval, but one thing for sure is that we're not maximizing to a known quantity, because the tests that we're giving students are changing so much. And so I think that in the future, we need to continue to be really curious and innovative and continuously update the types of measurements that we're using in the attempt to approximate what we're never going to get fully at, which is something that can tell us everything about who a student is and where they're going at the same time. Because, if you think about that, it's a classic kind of Heisenberg problem, right? It's like, you can know the position of an electron, right? Or you can know its speed. Isn't that what it is? I'm not a physics person. Or is it you can know the mass or you can know the speed, right?
Close enough.
So who a student is today and where they're headed, right, is what you want to know. But if you quantify too hard, if you nail them down too hard to the spot of who they are today, you're going to impede their progress about where they're going.
Joe Cornelli put down position versus momentum, which is a really nice way of phrasing it.
Right. I think that's correct.
Thank you so much for those two terrific questions. In my notes, I'm going to need to add some citations. We have a couple more questions that came up from the Ask button. Let's see. One of them was from Pamela. What's your view on states or districts using funds for a more holistic approach to education, like ASCD's Whole Child Initiative? Did we read that, or did I mangle it?
So, I mean, I think that experimentation is good. There's funds in the new education law, like I said, for school districts to try different approaches. And, if they're worthwhile, if they deliver value to teachers and students, I don't see why not.
Again, experiments. Right? We are still in the heroic age of figuring out how this works. We have another question from Brett. I think this is from Brett Besson, unless there's another Brett here. He asks, are you familiar with Quest to Learn? How is that perceived outside of games-based learning folks?
Oh, I think they're really influential. I profile them in the book. And I mean, I don't know if I'm outside or inside the games-based learning camp, but I know that they are highly connected within the world of informal learning and as well as badging and project-based learning, and I think that they're inspiring to all. They also have influenced this organization called Glass Lab, which comes out of the Institute of Play, which also started Quest to Learn. So Glass Lab is an attempt to kind of fuse games and assessment in a really different way, which I also profile in the book, not to be too advertorial, but it happens to be. They're in there.
Well, that's okay because it's a really important book. I think we have time for one more question, and then we may just have blown past the limit of the hour. Matthew wants to know if you're familiar with Todd Rose and the end of average. His research indicates that there is no average and we end standardization.
We are huge mutual fans of each other. I interviewed him for NPR about his book on the blog, and I'll try to find the link and get it up. And he told me that he liked reading the test. So I think it's a really important book, and it's destined to make impact, I think, because he's also started an organization to try to further this notion of, that we should do this thing of actual individualized learning, that it's worth the effort to actually try it because we know that averages aren't useful. And he states it as baldly as that. He doesn't find averages useful.
Well, that sounds terrific. And if my Googling doesn't succeed, if you could fling me that your NPR interview with him, that would be terrific.
I actually just dropped it in the
Speaking
chat.
of terrific, oh, perfect. Thank you. Mike somehow accelerated to something near the speed of light, and we have run out of time. It is 3 o'clock Eastern time, and we have a stack of comments and questions in the chat box. So here's what I'd like to do. Let me, in the interest of everybody's schedule and time, let me wrap this up, and then I will stick around here for about another 10 minutes and address the questions that have come up in the chat as best I can. Anya, I know your time is precious. If you can stay, that's fabulous. If you can't, I totally understand. This is way beyond anything I would have asked for. I'm going to copy all of this into my notes, which are going to go to my blog, along with a recording of this session. So that if you'd like to pursue things there, that will be there. Anya, any last comments, any last parting shots you'd like to give?
I just want to thank all of you for your interest. I think it's really important to unite the conversations going on in higher ed and K-12 when it comes to assessment, because after all, we are trying to move students along the continuum. And I always find the higher ed world in particular to be extremely innovative on these questions. So thanks again for your thoughts.
Well, thank you so much. A round of applause for your participation, for your ideas, for your good humor, for your sound quality, and for your writing. We may have to bring you back on just to handle this huge overflow conversation. Shindig folks, if you could just gently move Anya over to one side so we could bring up the PowerPoint for the last slide. Again, if you haven't had a chance, you can learn more about Anya. Our newsletter is rich. Her books are, as you can see, full of great ideas and information. There's a link to the test if you'd like to grab that. Over to the next slide, please. Next Tuesday at 11 o'clock, the next Future Trends